Good evening and welcome back to the Courier Journal's continuing coverage of Election Night 2020. I'm Kirby Adams along with Joe Girth here in the Courier Journal building in downtown Louisville. And we're joined by political reporters Joe SONKA, Morgan Watkins, and by Matt MENCARINI. And Joe Girth, let's start with you. Presidential race. You've got some news.
Yes, the few minutes ago, the Associated Press called Kentucky for Donald Trump. It was not a surprise. Once again, like in 2016, Kentucky was the first state to go for Trump. Part of that's because we get the numbers in fairly quickly here in Kentucky, but another part of it is it's an overwhelming victory for Trump.
Why is it that we get numbers in so early here? Or quickly, I should say.
Well, I think part of it is that we have got 120 counties, and so it doesn't take long to get the votes from the far edges of the county into the county seat where they're tabulated and then sent on. So, but we just have a good system here in Kentucky also.
Well, that's good to hear.
So.
Speaking of voting, Matt MENCARINI, were there any irregularities that you heard about as you were covering the vote today?
No, on that front, it was pretty smooth sailing for Kentucky. In Jefferson County, shortly after polls closed, the county reported no significant major or widespread voting intimidation, fraud, misinformation issues. The Attorney General's office, as of 4:30, said the same, waiting on final updates from them, but it appears Kentucky was pretty clear of all that today.
Did you have some numbers on how many early voters went through the polls?
I think Joe SONKA has those numbers.
Oh, Joe SONKA has those numbers.
And Joe, you're not on.
Joe's following the directions. We said keep your mic muted until it's time to speak.
All right.
Then I throw him a question he's not ready for.
Sorry about that. So early voting in Kentucky, 590,000 so far have submitted a absentee ballot. That was as of yesterday. And early voting, Kentucky had 1.6 million who came in to vote early. The state board of the executive director of the state board of elections was projecting that they could get as many as 2.2 million people to turn out after today's voting. So that would mean somewhere around 600,000 people voting today. We don't have the official turnout figure for how many voted today, but it looks like we're headed for the largest turnout rate that we've had since 2008, and in the grand total of number of voters, this would be, looks like we're going to have a record.
What are you hearing at this point from Republicans in the legislature about going with early voting and mail-in voting in future elections?
It seems like they're much more willing to go along with early voting, with early in-person voting. Sounds like Secretary of State Michael Adams is going to be in favor of that. Probably, I would say there's less of a chance that there could be permanent mail-in voting. Republicans are less in favor of that, but I think both are extremely popular. With the public. I think they've appreciated being how easy it's been to vote, and it doesn't really look like we've had a lot of problems with either of them. I assume once you get the price tag of how much this has cost, and doing this next year, what the cost will be when you don't have a pandemic. Well, guess we might have a pandemic, so it might be the same thing next year too. But I think the price tag will be something that some Republicans will want to see.
And as you were saying, Matt, there seem to be really no issues with voting.
Correct. Yeah, there was about, as of 4 o'clock, the last time the AG's office had updated their hotline database online, 50 more complaints have been filed compared to 2016. But given issues with different voting locations, mask requirements, it's hard to make an apples to apples comparison. I haven't seen anything or heard anything at this point about any major issues with suppression or intimidation.
All right, and so Morgan Watkins has been covering the McConnell and McGrath U.S. Senate races. Let's have a listen to what both candidates had to say yesterday as they were out on the campaign trail.
I believe in our democracy, and that's not a red or blue thing to say. You know, I've said this many times on the trail. I'm a Democrat. I'm very proud of that. I married a lifelong Republican. He's standing right there. You know, my parents were different political parties. I mean, you vote for the person, not the party. I just feel like we've got to get back to that. We've got to get back to what our country is all about, that you have campaigns, but at the end of the day, once an election's over, you work towards, in good faith, for the good of the country, for the good of Kentucky. Does anybody believe Senator McConnell does that?
Today and tomorrow are the most important days for us, because all indications are that the people who are going to vote for Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell will turn out in large numbers today and tomorrow. So don't run out of energy. Don't run out of energy. For us, the best is yet to come, in all likelihood, today and tomorrow.
So Morgan, that's what the candidates were doing yesterday. At this point, I know that you said that you've been covering some of their different events, masks outside, some socially distanced, maybe some others not quite so much. But it sounds like that Amy McGrath was spending a lot more time holding smaller rallies and that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. When the pandemic first hit the states in March, she really pretty much most candidates around the country kind of shut down their sort of in-person events. But then obviously when this became a long-term thing that we're all living with, Amy McGrath and plenty of other candidates around the country basically, started to hold events again. And so, yeah, she's been doing that for several months now. She's been, through the summer and then now that we're getting into fall, she's been sort of traveling the state, flying around, to different parts of the state, holding outdoor events, always asking people to come masked. Usually, not too big. Like typically, at least the ones that I've been to have been, pretty socially distanced. I haven't been to one that had more than maybe 70 people. Although that's still, in the time of coronavirus, is for some people, it feels like anything over 10, it's a lot when we're all being kind of paranoid about our proximity to other people. But yeah, so she's been doing these socially distanced events, really talking one-on-one with voters, really just trying to fire people up, inspire them to get out to vote, to kind of join her in attempting to defeat Mitch McConnell, and really kind of trying to bring a more bipartisan, has been striking a more bipartisan tone. Part of her strategy, which a lot of people have been skeptical of, but which she's really pushed for, is to try to win over conservatives in Kentucky who are big fans of Donald Trump, but maybe don't like Mitch McConnell so much. So she's very much been much more bipartisan, often saying that, she'll work with people of both parties. She doesn't wear a red jersey or a blue jersey when it comes to accomplishing things for Kentucky. Meanwhile, Senator McConnell at his recent election rallies, they've been very partisan. He's been saying, the Democrats are a far left radical party, trying to fire people up to turn out to vote against the Democrats, sort of radicalism as he terms it, and really trying to tie Amy McGrath to what he sees, and plenty of other Republicans see as a radical, left party now.
One thing that I've noticed, Amy McGrath is speaking a lot about the fact that she's a Democrat and her husband is a lifelong Republican, which that message is coming out a lot now. I don't know if it's more so here near the end of the campaign, but speaking of what you just said, showing both sides bipartisan.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's come up periodically throughout her campaign. But yeah, that is something she's touched on. She mentioned it at the event that I was at last night that she held in Lexington. There's been talk, I've seen some stories about these, politically divided marriages at a deeply partisan time in America. And so for her, like when she brings that up, it does kind of drive home her point of, hey, I'm not the hyper partisan that Senator McConnell and his campaign says I am. Although, of course, Senator McConnell's campaign says, no, yes, she is. She'll vote, in lockstep with the party leaders for, liberal priorities. But yeah, she's definitely noted that sort of division within her own marriage, just in terms of political sides, as sort of an example of how she does have a more bipartisan approach where she doesn't just, you know, shut out anybody who's a member of the GOP.
Do you feel like that's hurt her with, you know, we saw Charles Booker getting such a surge at the end of his campaign in the primary against her and nearly catching up to her. A lot of the Democratic voters, at least in Louisville and Lexington and some of the more liberal places, want a real liberal candidate. How badly is she kind of tamping down her what could be her base by doing that?
I guess we'll see tonight. I mean, I think that it's fair to, I mean, there definitely has been some skepticism. I think with how intense this entire election season has been, especially with President Trump at the top of the ballot, I think people do tend to kind of look, I think people on both sides of the aisle look at you kind of skeptically if you try to strike a more moderate tone, just because I think as a country, it's pretty obvious that there's some pretty stark divisions there. So I do think there's been some skepticism. Mostly, I think, though, it's just, at least at the primary, I think it came down to just, you know, Charles Booker representing a more progressive side of the party and Amy McGrath striking a more moderate tone. Although I'm sure for some Republicans, she's not moderate enough, right? That any Democrat may be too far left. But who knows? I mean, I think that what the McGrath campaign has been betting on is that ultimately even voters who would have preferred to see Charles Booker running against Senator McConnell tonight, that they'll ultimately, what they want most is for Mitch McConnell to lose. And so they'll show up and vote for her.
All right. So Joe SONKA, before we leave you, any more numbers that you're seeing coming across your screen?
Well, we have 3 congressmen. The race has been called for them: James Comer, Brett Guthrie, and Hal Rogers. Everyone expected all 3 of those to win. The race hasn't been called yet for Thomas Massey in the Northern Kentucky, the 4th district. Josh Hicks, the Democrat Josh Hicks, challenging Republican incumbent Andy Barr. That race has not been called yet. AP totals show Hicks in the lead right now, but there's still a lot of counties outside of Fayette County that have yet to be counted yet. Those are expected to be very heavy for Andy Barr. He's winning Madison County by a really huge amount of votes right now. So Andy Barr could easily catch up once those counties are counted.
All right.
And nationally, the one thing of note that I would like to point out, in Florida, they've got 73% of the vote counted, and Biden is holding a narrow lead over Donald Trump there. So,
all right, we'll
Few
keep
points.
that information coming. Thank you, Joe,
Morgan, and Matt for joining us during this half hour. We will be back with more here from the Courier Journal building in downtown Louisville as our continuing coverage of Election Night 2020 continues. We'll be back on Facebook Live and on courierjournal.com at 8:30, and then continuing on the half hour like that throughout the evening. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here again at 8:30.